That is very sluicable.
Awesome way.
That was amazing.
The material that we ran off the tailings is they're doing better than what we're doing on the hill. Let's get out, let's do some more.
For decades, a single patch of land in the Yukon sat untouched, a ghost of its former self. Its tunnels, once alive with the clatter of picks and the sweat of desperate men, were now collapsed and silent. Thick grass swallowed the entrance, and wild animals wandered freely through what was once a bustling claim. Miners passing by would glance at it and shake their heads. That mine's rotten from the inside, they'd mutter. To them, it was a curse, a waste of time, effort, and money. But not to Tony Beets. Where others saw decay, Tony saw potential. He had made a career out of proving people wrong, out of chasing gold in the most unlikely places. And when he stood over that abandoned claim, looking at the overgrown tailings and crumbling wooden sluices, something inside him whispered, "There's still gold here." This is the story of how Tony Beets, one of the boldest miners on Gold Rush, took on a challenge everyone else had abandoned. And what he discovered deep inside this forgotten mine might just blow your mind. Before we dive deeper, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because this season's discoveries only get wilder from here. If you've ever tuned in to Gold Rush, you know this isn't just a job, it's a battle. Mining gold in the Yukon is a constant war against nature itself. Freezing rivers, unforgiving mud, collapsing ground, and machines that break down at the worst possible moment. Every single day costs thousands of dollars, and every wrong decision can wipe out an entire season's profit. And yet, people can't look away. There's something primal about the hunt for gold, that raw human instinct to dig, fight, and claw through the earth for even a few shimmering flakes. That's why millions of viewers follow miners like Parker Schnabel and Tony Beets, watching them risk everything for a shot at life-changing riches. But this time, Tony wasn't chasing easy gold. He was going after something that everyone else had given up on. A mine long thought to be empty, dangerous, and cursed. Why would Tony risk everything on this forgotten place? The answer lies in the ground itself. While most miners dismiss the claim as worthless, Tony spotted something they missed: white channel gravel, a classic sign of an ancient riverbed, one that could have carried gold downstream and left it buried deep underground. Thick veins of quartz crisscross the exposed rock face, indicators that gold might be hiding in the cracks. Tony crouched down, running his fingers across the gravel, his eyes sharp. "See that?" he said to his crew. "That's quartz. That's an indicator. There's gold here. I can feel it." Skepticism hung in the air. This place had been abandoned for decades, for a reason. But Tony's gut had led him to gold before. Could it really do it again? With a roar of diesel engines, the silence of the old mine was shattered. Excavators clawed into the earth, ripping away decades of history. Dust filled the air. The ground trembled beneath the weight of machinery. Bit by bit, the forgotten tunnels were uncovered, layer by layer, revealing secrets no one had touched in generations. But the risk was enormous. Every hour of digging burned thousands of dollars in fuel and wages. And there were no guarantees. If Tony was wrong, if the old miners had stripped this place bare decades ago, the gamble could bankrupt him. As the first buckets of pay dirt were sent to the wash plant, the tension was unbearable. The crew gathered around the pan, watching as water swirled and gravel washed away. And then, a flash, a glint, a tiny spark of yellow, gold. However, finding success in this abandoned mine was easier said than done. The deeper Tony Beets looked into it, the more he realized this wasn't just another claim. It was a gamble unlike anything he had faced before. At the very start of the season, Tony was already fighting an uphill battle. His crew was smaller than ever. Key machines were breaking down, and the targets they had set for gold recovery were slipping further out of reach. Every day that passed without a major strike cost them thousands of dollars. The pressure to deliver results was suffocating. With the hunker cut and piggy bank cut nearly tapped out, Tony knew he needed a miracle. That miracle came in the form of an overlooked piece of ground, the old-timer tailings. To most miners, these were nothing but wasted gravel left behind by those who came before. But Tony had a different instinct. He had learned long ago that what others abandoned often held the richest surprises. While scouting the site, Tony noticed something unusual: the remains of an ancient sluice run, half buried under years of silt and moss. Wooden beams, weathered by decades of frost and thaw, hinted at a forgotten operation. The more he studied it, the more questions he had. Why had the old miners walked away? Had they run out of gold, or just out of time and technology? Tony couldn't shake the thought. What if those miners quit too soon? What if the richest layer of pay dirt was still sitting untouched, right beneath their feet? Determined to find answers, he brought his son Kevin into the plan. Kevin was skeptical at first. After all, hundreds of miners had ignored this place for decades. But as Tony revealed the history, Kevin's curiosity grew. This hill, Tony explained, was legendary. It was the very first site in the Klondike where mechanical mining had ever been attempted. Back then, miners relied on crude wooden sluice boxes that were cleaned only once a year. The inefficiency of those methods meant only one thing: massive amounts of gold could still be trapped in the gravel, waiting for someone bold enough to claim it. The timeline of abandonment fascinated the crew. The miners who had worked this land had quit sometime in the late 1950s, maybe even earlier. They left behind a landscape scarred by their efforts, piles of tailings, half-finished shafts, and scattered tools, now swallowed by nature. In a way, Tony wasn't just chasing gold. He was finishing a story that had been left incomplete for over half a century. To test the ground, Tony ordered a small excavation near the old sluice box. The moment the first bucket of gravel was pulled up, the crew could see the layers: white channel gravel, heavy black sand, and glimmers of quartz. These were classic indicators of pay dirt. If even the preliminary pans showed color, this entire hill could turn into a gold mine bigger than anything Tony had touched before. But Tony also knew the risk. Working tailings was unpredictable. Some sections could pay out heavily, while others could be completely barren. And in gold mining, every wasted hour meant burning diesel, labor, and cash, resources they couldn't afford to squander. Still, Tony was never one to play it safe. Fortune favors the bold, he reminded his crew, firing up the machines and preparing to dig deeper than anyone had in 50 years. To Tony Beets, this meant only one thing. If some of the gold had been missed by those miners from long ago, there was a real chance that he and his crew might still find it, buried deep within those forgotten tailings. The thought alone was electrifying. For decades, that gold had lain untouched, waiting for someone bold enough to dig it out. Now, Tony and his men were standing on that very ground, ready to see if history had left them a fortune. With hopes running high, Tony wasted no time. He rolled out the excavator, its engine roaring to life as if answering the call of the gold itself. Dust swirled around them as steel bit into gravel, and the team stood by, eyes fixed on every scoop pulled from the earth. They were the first crew to dig here in generations, and they knew it. This wasn't just another cut. This was new territory, unclaimed and untested. The excitement was palpable, but so was the tension. For every hopeful thought of gold, there was a whisper of doubt. Was there really anything left down here? The old-timers were thorough in their day, maybe too thorough. What if those miners had already stripped every last flake of gold from the soil, leaving nothing but empty gravel behind? Such doubts didn't last long. Tony ordered a pan test. A small amount of dirt was scooped into a pan, swirled in water, and carefully washed down. And then, there it was. A flash, a sparkle. Gold. The unmistakable gleam sent a rush of excitement through the crew. Heads snapped up, smiles broke out. They had found something. But one speck wasn't enough to prove the mine's worth. More pans were tested. More dirt swirled. And each time, the result was the same. Tiny golden flakes shimmering in the water. It wasn't just luck. This place was loaded. "Look," one of the miners shouted, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's all over the pan. That's gold. That's a very good indicator. The realization hit everyone at once. The ground they were standing on, dismissed for decades as worthless, was a hidden gold field. Somehow, the old-timers had missed it all. And now Tony's crew stood to gain what generations before them had left behind. Even Mimi, usually the calmest member of the team, couldn't contain her excitement. She grinned, eyes shining with the same hunger for gold that had driven prospectors here a century earlier. For a moment, everyone felt it. The raw thrill of discovery, the connection to history, and the promise of untold riches just below their feet. It made you wonder, how many opportunities like this had been overlooked in history? If those old miners had struck this deposit back then, what would it have meant for them? Could they have changed the course of their own lives, even the Klondike's history itself? But there was no time for speculation. The gold was here now, and it was Tony's to claim. The next logical step was obvious. Scale up. Panning was good for a hint, but it wasn't enough to prove the ground's true potential. To know if this place was really worth their time, they'd have to run a full load of dirt through the wash plant. Only then could they measure just how much gold the old-timers had left behind. And so, the focus shifted to the kiwi plant. This wasn't just any machine. This high-efficiency wash plant was built to separate gold from dirt with incredible accuracy. If the test run came back strong, Tony would know that he had stumbled onto one of the richest paydays of his career. If it failed, they'd have to face the crushing reality that all this work had been for nothing. The stakes couldn't be higher. As the crew prepared to feed their first load of tailings into the kiwi plant, every man and woman on site held their breath. The hum of machinery filled the air. Gravel rattled against steel. Water roared down the sluices. And with each passing second, the answer drew closer. The kiwi plant wasn't just another tool. It was the make-or-break moment for Tony Beets and his crew. This machine would separate reality from hope, gold from dirt, and fortune from ruin. Everyone on site knew it. The results of this first wash could decide the entire season. Monica, Tony's daughter, was the first to act. Without waiting for orders, she climbed into the loader's cab, slammed the door shut, and fired up the engine. The roar of the machine filled the chilly air as she maneuvered toward the towering pile of pay dirt. Each scoop of gravel, nearly 100 yards an hour, crashed into the hopper with a metallic thud. This wasn't just work. This was a race against time, against doubt, against the ghosts of miners who had walked away from this ground decades ago. At the same time, rookie operator Desiree, still proving herself to the crew, kept her eyes locked on the fine material. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, but she kept moving, clearing out debris, making sure every ounce of pay dirt made it through the system. "Don't mess this up," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than anyone else. For a moment, everything ran like clockwork. Engines roared. Water thundered through sluice channels. The team stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the first test run with quiet hope. Then it happened. A sound cut through the air. Sharp, metallic, gut-wrenching. Crack. The entire site went silent. Heads snapped toward the sluice run. For a moment, no one breathed. Tony knew that sound. Everyone did. His worst fear had just come true. The massive sluice run, the backbone of the entire operation, had just broken down. "Shut it down!" Tony shouted over the chaos. "Kill everything!" The machinery fell silent, leaving only the ringing echo of the brake in the cold Yukon air. Within minutes, they found the problem. A snapped cable, dangling like a lifeless snake across the frame of the sluice run. But this was no simple fix. This wasn't just a broken part, it was a threat to the entire season. Every hour they sat idle meant $2,000 gone, slipping through their fingers like the very gold they were chasing. And the cruel irony, they still didn't even know if there was gold in this ground at all. For Tony, failure wasn't an option. He gathered his crew, voice firm, eyes blazing. "Here's what we're gonna do," Tony growled. "Bend that bar back straight. Weld the piece back on. Reset the angle on the run. Do it fast. Do it right. We don't stop until this thing's running again." The crew scattered into action. Sparks burst from welders as they cut and reforged the twisted metal. Heavy beams groaned as they were forced back into alignment. The air filled with the smell of hot steel and sweat. Every man and woman knew the stakes. Every second wasted was money burning. Passers-by could only watch from a distance as the Beets crew worked like a machine themselves, cutting, welding, bolting, realigning. Hours slipped by, 8 brutal, back-breaking hours of labor. Finally, as night began to fall, the last weld cooled. The cables were retensioned. The sluice run stood straight once more, gleaming faintly in the floodlights. Tony gave a nod. "Fire it up." Engines roared back to life. Water surged through the sluice. Pay dirt rattled across the riffles. In that moment, it was as though nothing had ever gone wrong. Except now, the crew carried the weight of exhaustion, hope, and fear all at once. Would it pay off? Or had they just wasted 8 hours and thousands of dollars fixing a machine for ground that might not even hold gold? Before we show you what came out of this wash, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the results. Trust me, what Tony finds next will shock you. For the next 4 hours, they ran dirt non-stop. No talking, no breaks, just the constant hum of machinery and the pounding of hearts waiting for the verdict. Finally, the test run ended. It was time. The crew gathered around the gold table, breath fogging in the cold air. The concentrate was poured into the pan. Slowly, carefully, they began washing it down. Tiny specks appeared first, then flakes, then nuggets. The pan glittered like a night sky. 4.2 ounces, Kevin announced, almost disbelieving. "That's $7,400. Cheers erupted. After weeks of doubt and grueling work, this forgotten ground had just proven itself richer than anyone had dared to hope. For Tony Beets, this was more than a payday. It was vindication. The abandoned mine the old-timers had walked away from still held gold, and now it belonged to him. And if this is what Tony found on the very first test run, just imagine what's waiting deeper in those tailings. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next load they run might change everything. But this was just the beginning. The test results had proven that the old-timer tailings were rich, far richer than anyone expected. But for Tony Beets and his crew, this victory opened the door to an even bigger challenge. Because if this test run revealed gold worth thousands of dollars, what would happen when they scaled up to full production? And just as Tony prepared to unleash every machine he owned on this forgotten ground, trouble was already brewing on the horizon. Rival miners had caught wind of Tony's discovery. Equipment shortages threatened to bring everything to a halt, and an unexpected setback with the weather would push Tony and his crew to the breaking point. In our next video, we'll uncover how Tony's bold gamble spiraled into one of the most intense gold hunts in Yukon history, and reveal the shocking twist that no one saw coming. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about Gold Rush.